All right, so let's move into the next group of tetrapods. So we did amphibia, so let's start breaking down the rest of the tetrapods, which are in a unranked or untaxonomic, a group that doesn't have a taxonomic grade, which are called, it's called Amniota. All right, so amniotes. So tetrapods, amniotes, these guys here, the reptiles, birds, and mammals, evolved around 340 million years ago. And these are organisms with nice waterproof skin. So here's a picture of a basilis, or a Jesus lizard, because it can run across water. And I took this as a brown basilis I took in Costa Rica that was sitting in a tree. And so we're going to talk about the reptiles, birds, and mammals in this next setup. And remember, our reptiles and birds are organized into two classes called Lepidosauria and Archelosauria. And then we'll last do the mammals, or Mammalia. So one of the major adaptations of the amniotes is the waterproof egg, right? And so this is a huge adaptation. So as I mentioned before, amphibians have to go back to water to lay their eggs. Their eggs have no protection, and so they need to be protected from desiccation or from dehydrating. So the major invention of evolution of the amniotes is to take the pond with me, to form a portable pond and an egg that has membranes around the embryo that protects the embryo from dehydration. And so we call these the amniotic egg. And the egg then can be laid anywhere in the terrestrial environment, right? And I don't need to go back to a pond or find a water source in order to produce babies. And so that's a major invention that allowed, of evolution, that allowed the reptiles and the birds and the mammals to move further away from the aquatic environment and become more terrestrial, if you will. There are a whole nother suite of characteristics that particularly arose in all of these groups, but particularly the reptiles that waterproof the skin, that again allows them to move out and take advantage of more of the niches of the terrestrial environment. So the amniotes are the first animals to be completely separated from water. There are reptiles that don't even know how to drink water. They don't know that water is, you can actually ingest it. They get all of their water from what they eat. And so, or they make it metabolically. You can make it by burning fat. And so there are reptiles out there that don't drink water at all. So that's pretty interesting. There are mammals that do this too. Whales, for example, don't drink water. They produce all of the water they need metabolically. Amniotes produce waterproof eggs. So the nice reptilian egg up here, this cute little lizard that's posing for you, throwing its tongue out, is a Komodo dragon, believe it or not, becomes one of the largest reptiles in the world. But this is a picture of the amniotic egg, showing you the membranes around the embryo. So you can see in the middle here we have the embryo, right? And then there are several layers surrounding the embryo that are called extraembryonic membranes. And I believe, well, they don't, so I believe I'll go through these really quickly, all right? And so I'll circle the extraembryonic membranes and I'll kind of tell you what they do here. So they don't list the chorion, the allantois, and the yolk sac. Okay, and then the amnion, there we go, there it is, couldn't find it. The fourth of our extraembryonic membranes. So there are four of them. We'll start here with the amnion, right? So amniotes are named because of the amnion. The amnion is the membrane that is directly surrounding the embryo. Inside the amnion is the water. So even humans develop inside of a portable pond, if you will, or inside water, right? And we call it amniotic fluid, and that's what's filling in the amnion. So the amnion is the membrane that surrounds the embryo and holds the amniotic fluid. There's two other membranes that you find associated with the embryo. One's called the yolk sac, which holds the yolk that feeds the embryo, all of the nutrients it needs to develop, all of the structures the embryo needs to develop. And there's another sac that's called the allantois, which is actually a waste-producing sac. It basically holds all the waste that the embryo produces in the egg so that they can remove it away from the embryo as the embryo develops. And then the last membrane surrounds the entire embryo is called the chorion. And the chorion prevents some water loss, but also has a large blood supply to it because it extracts oxygen from the surrounding embryo. Reptiles and birds also surround their embryo with a shell. The shell is not an extraembryonic membrane. It's actually added to the fertilized egg as it passes through the female reproductive tract in a part of the female reproductive tract that's called the shell gland. And the shell gland adds that calcium carbonate, that calcium salts, to the outside of the egg, which is then released, which helps protect the egg and the embryo. The shell also prevents some water loss, but is also permeable to oxygen and carbon dioxide, which allows the chorion to extract oxygen and to dump carbon dioxide to the environment. So those are the layers of the typical amniotic egg. So all amniotes typically have also waterproof skin so that they can live in very dry environments. They have highly efficient kidneys to conserve water. Again, so many of them can concentrate urine. A highly effective large intestine, which again helps them remove water and finish digestion. They lack metamorphosis, so they have what's called complete metamorphosis, not incomplete. Complete metamorphosis in the sense that the offspring that are born are just miniature adults. There's no larval stage. And then internal fertilization. So almost all the amniotes, they actually dump the sperm into the female reproductive tract directly because sperm is very fragile and dehydrates really easily. So we transport it directly to the female reproductive tract so that sperm can effectively get to the eggs and swim through the female reproductive tract to fertilize eggs. All right, so let's start talking about the groups, right? So again, we are in superclass Tetrapoda. Now this class here is called Lepidosauria. So Lepidosauria includes the tuatara, the lizard, and the snake. I'm not going to talk much about tuataras. Tuataras are a lizard-like reptile that are in its own group because of their own characteristics. They're also a very old group and one of the slowest evolving groups in the world. They look a lot like they did back when they were running around with dinosaurs. And this is a low metabolic rate lizard-like reptile that lives in New Zealand and looks very old school, right? So that's about all I'm going to tell you about that particular group. But it is not a lizard. It's kind of its own separate order, if you will. All right. So we're going to talk about the orders that include lizards and snakes. So that are within this class, Lepidosauria. So Lepidosauria includes an order that's called Squamata is the name. All right. So order Squamata includes lizards and snakes. Lizards and snakes used to be separated into suborders, believe it or not, or into their own orders. Now we've combined them as we understand that snakes are basically the climax of lizard evolution. And so snakes are the most derived lizards, if you will. So that's kind of how we include them in their phylogeny and taxonomy. I kind of teach them in separate slides, lizards by themselves and snakes by themselves, because that's classically how they've been taught. So lizards evolved, the modern lizard groups evolved about, just under 200 million years ago. And they have a bunch of really neat characteristics. So they have great vision, they have external ears, they hear well, and they have small peg-like teeth that they can use to grip and capture prey. They again have three-chambered hearts. Reptiles basically have three-chambered hearts just like the amphibians. They inherit that three-chambered heart from the amphibian group. They're all ectothermic, which means that they rely on the environment to warm up and cool their bodies. So you can see this lizard here is actually laying out under the sun and absorbing UV radiation to warm itself up. They have many defenses. They have scales, claws, teeth, venom. They have frills they can throw out like this frill lizard to scare off prey to make them look larger. They have venom, which is different than poison that's secreted on the surface. They can actually inject it, right? Either through their saliva by chewing it in or through fangs, specialized teeth. Lizards also have autotomy, which means that they can release their tail when something comes up and grabs onto them, so that their tail moves around and the predator focuses on the tail and the lizard survives another day. And often they can grow that tail back. So the Komodo dragon here is one of the groups, that's what this lizard on top is, that is actually venomous, that actually can chew venom into its prey. The snakes are the ones with the fangs that can actually inject venom into their prey. So it's hard to represent all the lizards. There's a lot of species here. It's a very successful group. There are over 4,000 species of lizards. And what I want you to notice, there are legless lizards that are very snake-like. The major difference between snakes and legless lizards are that legless lizards have an ear opening behind the eye. Snakes do not have an external ear, so they don't have that external ear opening. To give you an idea, leglessness has arisen within the lizards about 60 times, 60 to 70 times, depending on who you read. And so this leglessness is very adaptive for fossorial or aquatic or semi-aquatic type of niches that lizards and snakes can occupy. There is one completely marine reptile called the marine iguana that lives exclusively in saltwater. There are several other reptiles that can tolerate saltwater very readily. Komodo dragons are one. Some of the crocodilian species are another. There are even lizards that can glide. They can spread their ribs out and fly across large spaces or glide across large spaces of up to 100 yards. So there are a bunch of unique adaptations that you find in the lizard group. Right here is another one of the venomous lizards, kind of here in the middle, right here, that is called the Gila monster, which you can find out southwest. The Sonoran deserts of Arizona, for example, that can chew venom into its victims. Most or a lot of lizards are insectivores, so a lot of them eat insects, particularly because most lizards are pretty small. The larger lizards, some of them can be carnivorous, but most of the really large lizards are vegetarians for the most part, or omnivorous. As young, when they're young, right out of the egg, they'll eat more insects and protein, but as they get older, they become almost complete vegetarians. That includes species like the iguanas, that, for example, that are completely vegetarian as adults. As you can see up here is an iguana eating some fruit off of a cactus. There's some very interesting looking scales and appendages that come off of lizards that are used either in ritualistic fighting or for defense, that are found in a slew of different shapes and diversity within the lizard group. Alright, so let's do snakes. So you can hear there's a den of garter snakes there. So garter snakes, when they come out of hibernation, they reproduce. You got one poor female here being bombarded by males who want to reproduce with her. The male that can hold on is the male that typically wins and gets to fertilize her eggs. But she plays hard to get. She runs. She's about twice the size of most of the males. So Lepidosauria still snakes. So one of my favorite groups. Here is a large reticulated python, the longest and one of the larger snakes in the world, that has eaten a sheep. I think it was somebody's sheep. So you can see that they can eat very large prey. So one of the major things with snakes is they can disarticulate or unhinge their jaw so that they can swallow large prey. They lack limbs. There is some vestigial structures in some of the snake groups where you can still see the pelvic girdles and maybe a little piece or a little portion of the upper hind limb. They lack ears, so there's no external ear opening. They're all carnivorous. They're all venomous. Most herpetologists think that all snakes release some type of venom to subdue their prey. Many are not toxic to humans. A few of them are very toxic, obviously, to humans. They're terrestrial, aquatic, fossorial. Snakes are really, and lizards in particular, are cosmopolitan, which means they're found all over the world except some of the colder areas like Antarctica. Snakes, like lizards, are ectothermic. They have 3-chambered hearts. And are really, as I mentioned, the epitome, the climax of lizard evolution. So you can see all these snakes. Garter snakes den in hundreds to thousands, depending on where you're at, in the same places. They hibernate together. A lot of snake species hibernate together, actually. Again, examples of snakes. Obviously, some of the snakes can be quite large. Up here, this is an anaconda. It's the heaviest snake in the world, right? South American snake. The reticulated python that swallowed the sheep is actually the longest snake in the world, over 30 feet. Here's a rock python down here. Again, another really large snake from Africa that can swallow really large prey. It's swallowing a deer down here. Again, this is a green mamba, and a lot of our venomous snakes have fangs that they use, hypodermic needles, to inject venom. And snakes occupy lots of different niches, eat lots of different prey, and people are deathly afraid of them, right? So because of their venoms can be very dangerous to humans. Alright, so that's Lepidopsaur. Now let's talk about Archelasaur. So Archelasaur includes turtles, crocodilians, and birds. So got a number of pictures up here, right? This is a cute picture I pulled off the internet that shows a little tortoise trying to attack a strawberry, right? That's a hatchling. Here's a really strange crocodilian called a gharial, which has its teeth sticking out on a very short bill. So you got this animal that's 20 feet long with this really narrowed head. It's a fish eater. It takes that bill and throws it around underwater and knocks fish out and then swallows them. And obviously the turtles are really unique among reptiles because of the shell, right? So the shell has two portions, as the top and the bottom part, which is called the plastron ventrally on the belly and the carapace on top. So again, we're down in this group right here, the turtles, crocodilians, and the birds. So most of our reptiles are going to be lizards and snakes, which are the second largest group of reptile, and then the birds, right, which are the largest group. Crocodilians, on the other hand, which we'll do here. I've done some research back in graduate school, and then this is me on an alligator on the bottom image. Crocodilians are not very speciosus. There are only 23 species of crocodilians across the world, but they are, and probably include, the largest reptile in the world, which is called the mugger or saltwater crocodile, which can reach lengths of over 30 feet and be over 2,000 pounds as far as their size. So they can be really large. But these are dinosaur relatives. They are sister to the modern dinosaurs in the Archosaurian line. They have 4-chambered hearts. Right, 4-chambered hearts here. So the 4-chambered hearts is different than 3. So they now have 2 ventricles and 2 atria, not just 1 ventricle. So they have 4-chambered hearts, just like mammals have 4-chambered hearts, just like birds have 4-chambered hearts. The 4-chambered hearts you see in crocodilians or birds are an example of convergent evolution to the mammal line. So these guys, the crocodilians, live in fresh and saltwater, brackish water, purely carnivorous, ambush hunters, and very powerful jaws that can crush, and then they typically spin to rip limbs off of large prey items. Again, ectothermic. And in this group, you should really be scared. So there are a couple species in this group that actually find humans very tasty. They see humans as prey items, particularly the mugger crocodile, which lives in Indonesia and Australia, can be very dangerous to humans. And if you swim in water sources where they're found. So you want to always be very respectful of the crocodilians if you're in their space or in water sources where they can actually be found. So here are some groups of crocodilians. So again, the crocodilians, the birds, crocodiles, and turtles are all oviparous. They lay eggs, as you'll see when I talk about their reproduction. And they have, birds in particular, and crocodilians also have extreme parental care. That is, mom takes care of them. So mom will make a nursery with most of the crocodilians. She'll build a big mound, a nest, and when the babies hatch, she'll dig them out, and then she'll carry them to a nursery where she will hang out and protect them. So if they start calling and babies can call, you better get out of the water or away from the water where mom may be hanging out, and she will come to protect them if she hears them. So some of these pictures I took, so this is one of the larger alligators that I actually helped catch. It was a 14-foot male. We drew some blood and released him. Some of the males we actually dissected. I was doing a study on spermatogenesis in them in graduate school. Interestingly, there are several crocodilians that can actually raise their body completely out of the water, so 800 to 1,000 pounds of weight in order to catch prey items out of trees, for example, or to knock birds out of trees. They're a pretty interesting group, a semi-aquatic group that is obviously a keystone predator, an apex predator where they're found. Okay, let's look at the birds next. So birds, again, are a group that lay eggs. All right, and the claim to fame of birds is that they are the most successful terrestrial vertebrates. The birds, or what is called aves, belong to the group Archosauria, right? So they are typically thought of, as dinosaurs, right? These are the living representative of dinosaurs. They're direct descendants of dinosaurs, so they're kind of the modern dinosaur, if you will. They evolved around, the modern group of birds evolved around 175 million years ago out of the Archosaur line and are closely related to velociraptors. Most velociraptors are thought to have had feathers. So in Jurassic Park, they didn't include feathers on the velociraptor because they thought velociraptors look like a big turkey. If you put feathers on them, they're not as scary looking, right? But most of the velociraptors, or all velociraptors that have good fossils, have been shown to have feathers, either covering most of or large portions of their body. So because of the feathers, they survived the KT extinction at about 65 million years ago, and which killed most other groups of dinosaurs, right? And then evolved into the modern groups of birds. Only animals with feathers, and all feathers are, as you can see down here in this beautiful bird here, are modified scales. These feathers can be used to retain body heat, down feathers. They can be used for flight in the modern birds, and they can be used as ornamentation the males use to attract females. They also have lightweight bone. The bone is pneumatized, has lots of airspace in it. It's much lighter weight. Its architecture is very strong, so it can support the bird's body weight and also support landing. But most birds are very light so that they can fly, particularly those that do fly. Most of the bird species in the world do fly. There are some heavier birds that don't, some larger birds that don't, like the ostrich. The kiwi are all examples of birds that don't fly. But most of the birds that we see today do fly, and they're very successful. There are over 9,000 species of birds because of the ability to fly. So some of the other adaptations or characteristics of birds include wings with flight feathers, scales on their legs like a typical reptile, lightweight skeleton, strong muscles, and very efficient multi-lobed lungs to extract oxygen both during inhalation and exhalation. Pretty amazing, so that they can produce enough energy for the demands of flight. All of them are oviparous, like the crocodilians, and lay eggs. They lack teeth but have a beak, right? They're all homeothermic, this group, or they're endothermic. Endo instead of ectothermic. So endo, that means they maintain their own body heat no matter what the temperature of the environment is. Mammals are also endothermic. Again, an example of convergent evolution. They have unidirectional flow of air through their lungs, which means the air comes in one direction and then back out, with passing through the lungs only once. Not like our air that we breathe in, it swirls around in the lungs and then comes back out the same way it came in. And I'm not going to explain to you how, but what that does is allow them to extract oxygen from the air during inhalation and exhalation, which they need to perform the feat of flight, the metabolism needed for the flight muscles to produce enough ATP to run the flight muscles to maintain flight and to maintain their basic overall metabolism. Birds have typically high metabolic rates. Four-chambered hearts, just like crocodilians, and also like mammals. And a lot of these birds lay really large eggs, all right? So they invest a lot in the egg and show very, very nice parental care to the offspring. So as I mentioned, there's like 9,500 species of birds overall. Again, I try to give you a couple pictures of their overall beauty and diversity. There are roughly 28 orders, highly diverse group. Again, a very cosmopolitan group found all over the world. And there is a wonderful bird class here, ornithology, that Dr. Sweets teaches if you're interested in birds. There are several faculty that are very interested in birds, including me. A lot of us photograph birds. So it's a wonderful group, and the feathers and the ability to fly have made them very, very successful. Alright, so those are the groups I'm going to talk about. The turtles I really didn't talk much about. Again, a group that is not as diverse as lizards and snakes. So, 300 species of turtle worldwide, and it's the shell that makes them very interesting, right? There are lots of turtles here in Indiana. This is kind of a phylogeny that shows where the dinosaurs belong, right? And so, because the original phylogeny I showed you didn't show where dinosaurs belong. So if you look at this phylogeny, we kind of zoomed in on amniotes. So we have this stem amniote here, stem reptile they call it. Up here we have our snakes and lizards, and then the tuatara. This is a group we call Lepidosauria, right? And then we got these aquatic groups that are no longer around, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, which are kind of their own clades. And then down here are the archosaurs. So notice the archosaurs include crocodilians, and then birds, and then these dinosaurs, theropods, velociraptors, T-Rex, the pterosaurs are all in that group. Those are kind of the derived dinosaurs, right? Notice birds are nested in that group. Sister to that group are the crocodilians, right? The living groups of crocodiles. And then notice turtles down here in apsids are found here. In reality, this is an old school phylogeny that shows where turtles are very basal, but turtles are probably sister to the archosaurs. So you could theoretically put them in this position, or you could X that position out and then attach them here, right? As a sister taxon, if you will, to the archosaurs. And then probably the oldest line of coming off the stem reptile group are a group called Synapsida, which are the mammals. And then there are some therapsid dinosaurs that eventually gave rise to the modern mammal groups because they survived that same KT boundary 65 million years ago that killed most of the major dinosaurs. So birds are within the dinosaur clade. Lizards and snakes are not direct descendants of dinosaurs, all right? They have a different common ancestor. Crocodilians are sister to the dinosaur taxa, and then turtles are most likely sister to archosaurs. So that's kind of where the dinosaurs fit into that, into our scheme. Okay, as I kind of mentioned along the way when we're talking about the amniotes, besides mammals, we can see all three. If you look at amniotes overall, we talk about mammals, birds, and the reptiles. There you can see all three reproductive strategies that we mentioned with sharks. So we have oviparous groups that lay eggs. Most snakes, for example, lay eggs. All birds, all crocodilians lay eggs. And then when you get into the snakes and lizards, you have some that are ovoviviparous, which retain the egg and then have live birth. So for the snakes, for example, about 70% of snakes lay eggs, and about 30% of them, or a little under 30% of them, are going to be ovoviviparous. And then there are even a few snakes that are viviparous, but they're very rare. Viviparity is found mostly in lizards when you see it, and there are several major groups of lizards that have a placenta it's pretty similar to what you see in mammals. But again, it's an example of convergent evolution. So the lizards, there are a lot of ovoviviparous lizards. There are a few that do viviparity, and there are several lizards that also lay eggs. So you can find all of the reproductive strategies across just reptiles, but across amniotes in general. Obviously, all the mammals except one group are viviparous. They have a placenta, and there, believe it or not, there's one group of mammals that actually lays eggs. All right, so let's talk about the mammals, right? Mammalia, we'll go through them and then we'll be done. So superclass Tetrapoda, class Mammalia. So the mammals include three major groups. We're called the monotremes, marsupials, and eutherians. So let's go through those groups. It's a picture of me. I actually got to hold a baby sloth in Peru. I was very lucky. As you can see how cute he is. The sloths, the babies in particular, always look like they're smiling. Okay, the evolution of mammals, as I mentioned, they come from a reptile group called Synapsida. And what synapsids are, means they have one major hole in the skull behind the eye socket. And the reason for this is because they lose a bone that actually helps attach the jaw to the skull, and it's called the quadrate bone. The quadrate bone here in green in the mammal group eventually leaves the jaw and is going to migrate to the inner ear and become the incus, which is one of the small ossicles. So we got the malleus, the stapes here. The stapes was the original bone I talked about that actually used to support the head in the early stegocephaline fish. But here, the stapes is found in the middle ear, along with the malleus. The incus moves there to form 3 bones in the mammals that are actually utilized to amplify sound to the inner ear. So when you lose that, you're going to lose this second hole down here and only have 1 hole. Syn means 1, synapse and 1 hole in the behind the eye, or in the temporal region, the side of the skull of the mammal line. And they include one of my favorite dinosaur groups, which are called plesiosaurs, which had the big sail fin that they thought was like a solar panel. It gathered heat from the sun. There were some blood vessels in there when they've done some MRI work, and some CT scanning on fossils show blood vessels, look like blood vessels in the sail that actually attract heat and warm the body up of the plesiosaurs. But these are what the mammal fossils look like. These synapses that eventually become what, same term, their apsids are basically these mammal-like reptiles that were thought to be warm-blooded, and most of them were under the size of for example, golden retriever or German shepherd. So they eventually give rise to the modern mammal groups. So Synapsida is an old group. They evolved about 324 million years ago, the modern mammals. And here are the major characteristics of mammals, right? So mammals all of them are viviparous except for the monotremes. They have mammary glands, which is a modified sweat gland that produces milk to feed the young. They have incredible parental care. They care for their babies for long periods of time. All mammals have hair. Even whales and dolphins have a little bit of hair on their body. They all have 4-chambered hearts. They have several types of teeth, they have very complicated teeth, which is much different than most of the other vertebrate groups. A couple of other characteristics that are just found in mammals. We have one solid mandible, which means our lower jawbone is one solid bone. It's not 2 bones like you see in the other vertebrates. We also have anucleated red blood cells. It's another character that's just mammalian. I'll call them RBCs. So our red blood cells lack a nucleus. And that's probably the only picture of a blood cell you've ever seen, a red blood cell. Most red blood cells in the rest of the groups of vertebrates have nuclei. So all mammals are homeothermic or endothermic, and we have very big brains. Mammals compared to body size, all of them do. And so, which allows us to interact with each other in our environments and do things like hunting in a squad, right? Or in a pack, which makes us more efficient. All right, so let's look at the orders that are found in class Mammalia, superclass Tetrapoda. So Monotremata is the first one, or what we call monotremes. These are egg-laying mammals. Isn't that weird? You got 2 mammals that lay eggs and are also considered to be the most primitive of the mammals. Platypuses and the echidna also have a cloaca, which is very unique to mammals. So this is what the echidna looks like. So it almost looks like they are called like spiny anteaters, and this is the platypus, right? 2 very odd-looking animals. So let's talk about both of them because they're kind of unique. So this is an Australian New Guinea group, right? They're only found in Australia and New Guinea. And let's do the platypus. Okay, that sound you hear is the platypus male calling. You'll hear it in a second. It's pretty unique, right? Pretty unique sound. Okay, so that sound you heard was the male calling, right? The male actually communicates to attract females. So these guys are found in Australia and Tanzania. They were discovered in right around 1800, and when they brought them to the museums in Europe, they thought it was a hoax. Thought somebody put these together. Very odd animal with the duck-like bill and the webbed feet, right? It's got some duck-like features. This bill is pretty amazing. It's kind of leather-like, and it has a lot of the same or similar electroreceptors that you find in sharks. And these electroreceptors allow these guys to find their prey underwater, or to create an electrical field that they can utilize to navigate the creeks that they live in. the platypus eye is very, very small to body size, and when they hunt, they actually underwater, as you can see in this picture here, close their eyes. They keep their eyes closed when they're underwater, and they use the electroreception of the bill to find prey and to navigate. So they basically don't use their vision to navigate. They use the electrical field that they can pick up around the bill. So males are venomous. They have a spine on their hind limb, or on their hind foot, that is venomous, that is thought to be used in ritualistic fighting and maybe protection. They are semi-aquatic. They hunt invertebrates underneath rocks and underneath debris within creeks. They have interesting body parts, waterproof fins, webbed feet, and the cloaca, which is a feature that they've inherited from the more non-mammalian-like vertebrates. So they're an interesting group. Also a highly endangered group in Australia. As I already mentioned, their bill detects electrical fields that are generated by muscle contraction of the prey around them, and also lets them navigate their environment by picking up the electrical field and building a map of the underwater world that they are swimming in. So the echidna, again, is Australian and Asian species. Whoops. Spiny anteaters. There are 4 species, and they're termite eaters. So again, they got some convergent evolution going on here between what we call our eutherian anteaters and the spiny anteater. So the jaws have been modified with a long tongue so that they can lap up and eat termites and ants. They are completely terrestrial. They have spines or quills. These spines are sharp and can deter predators. They have a cloaca, again, just like the platypus, which is very unique. Mammals, all the rest of the mammal groups have separate openings for the reproductive, urinary, and digestive tracts. Fantastic claws, great diggers, so they can dig down to hide and protect themselves, or dig through termite mounds to find their prey. And use that long tongue in order to capture the termites. And they, again, are critically endangered. This shows you the size of the egg of the baby, and the baby coming out there of a spiny anteater. They're really small. They're about a little bigger than the thumbnail. So, pretty interesting, unique animal. The monotremes are very unique in that they lay eggs. Okay, marsupialia are the marsupials. So, we have some marsupials here in Indiana, right? The possum, or opossum, however you want to say it. I saw one last night, actually, on my bird feeder. So they have prehensile tails, the possums do, and they are going to be viviparous, but they're going to basically give birth very early to their young, and the young are going to be hairless, eyes are going to be closed, and then they're going to climb into a pouch, right, a sac that's on the female belly, and that is where they will then latch onto a mammary gland and finish development. So these guys carry underdeveloped young in a pouch. The pregnancy is very, very short, 4 to 5 weeks. They lack a very complex placenta. The placenta is very similar to what you would see, for example, in a reptile that's viviparous. The babies are called joeys, right? And they have a cloaca, again, that's different than most of the mammals that we find on the planet, the eutherian mammals. They are viviparous. They do have mammary glands. Males have a bifurcated penis, a 2-headed penis, and the females actually have 3 vaginas, which is interesting. So the 3 vaginas, the 2 of the openings are going to fit the 2-headed penis, and then the 3rd opening is to deliver the joey. So they have a separate opening to deliver the baby than they do to collect sperm. It's pretty interesting. Again, very unique to marsupials, and they're called marsupials. These groups, and so you got North American, you got South American, you got Australian and Tasmanian groups here. The Tasmanian devil, for example, is one of these unique marsupials. Some of the sugar gliders, old world sugar gliders, are marsupials. This is a picture of a kangaroo joey after birth, attached to the mammary gland inside of the sac. The babies will stay with mom for long periods of time, and even will remain in this pouch long after they really need it, as a source of comfort and protection. Okay, our last subclass within the mammalian, the mammals, whoops, is the eutherian group. All right, so Eutheria are live-bearing mammals, and this is the largest group of mammals, the most successful group of mammals. And so these guys have complicated placentas, and they give live birth after the baby is fully developed. And the babies are parasites. They're attached to mom's blood supply and feed and gather oxygen and dump waste products into the mom's blood supply. So she cares for them not only after birth, but during the whole developmental process. So major adaptive radiation of this group happened about 65 million years ago, obviously when the dinosaurs all died out and a bunch of niches were opened up, right, within the terrestrial environment. So large pelvic opening to deliver babies. So we have 4 major clades, all right, 4 major groups within the eutherians and within this subclass. We have Xenarthra, we have Afrotheria, we have Laraceatheria, and we have Euarchontoglires. Euarchontoglires is the group that includes actually humans. So let's talk about these 4 major clades that are found within Eutheria. So there's a little phylogenetic tree down here that shows those 4 clades that are found within Eutheria. So one of my favorite groups of mammals is this group here, which are the Xenarthra, which are just a weird group, or what we consider the basal group of eutherians. They include the anteaters, the tree sloths, and the armadillos. And I've seen a lot of sloths in Central America, but the armadillo is, again, a very interesting mammal, and the anteater is just a very unique, very specialized mammal. Probably the interesting thing about these is their vertebrae. They have very unique vertebrae that have an extra articulation. That's what Xenarthra means, is the extra articulation within the backbone. They're found in the Americas. And their ancestors were the America megafauna, the really large mammals like tree sloths. If you don't know what a tree sloth is, look up the prehistoric tree sloth. They're huge, 8-10 feet tall, just these huge megafauna that first arose after the dinosaurs disappeared. So the Xenarthrans have very, very low metabolic rates. They typically have a little less, they have lower body temperature than the other eutherians. Males have internal testicles because of that. The testicles in mammals, in the eutherian mammals, have to be outside the body because sperm develops at a slightly lower temperature than 98.6 degrees. Since these guys have lower body temperatures, they can keep the testicles internalized to protect them because their body temperature is under 98.6 degrees. But they're an interesting group. Sloths are very interesting. The tree sloths, they can, hardly move their entire body very well because their lack of muscle. They can hardly move their entire body around when they're on the ground because of their lack of muscle tissue. And so they spend most of their time in the trees. There's the 3-toed and the 4-toed sloths that you find in Central and South America. Armadillos are also interesting. They've lost most of their hair. They still have hair, and they have this kind of leathery armor. Their skin, they're one of the mammals that can actually carry leprosy. So they're one of the mammals that can carry leprosy. Pretty interesting. The anteaters, again, like the spiny anteater, have a very specific niche. So the jaws have been modified into a tube, and the tongue is long, and they have very strong forelimbs so that and claws that they can rip open termite mounds and ant hills, and then that's what they feed on. The next superorder here is Afrotheria. So we got class Mammalia, and then we got these 4 superorders. We're not going to go farther down than superorders, but within those superorders are several orders. So Afrotheria, as you can imagine, are groups of organisms that arose in Africa. At least that's where their ancestors are from. And they include elephants, hyraxes, sea cows like the manatee, which you can find in America, and you can also find over in Australia. Elephant shrews and the tenrecs. Tenrecs are these guys here, which is a very unique group of mammals that fill a lot of the niches in Africa that are shrews and mice and armadillos, would fill here in the Americas. And so, again, large number of vertebrae in this group. Many have long snouts. We have an aquatic species here, and we got some unique species here. Some of them have very low metabolic rates also. A few of them have cloacas also, compared to the separate openings. So there's a mixture of groups here. The major theme here is the number of vertebrae and long snouts in most cases, right, with all of these guys, and they're all African in origin. DNA analysis also supports this group as a group out of Africa. The next two groups 3 and 4, include such diversity that it's really hard to see any anatomical connections to the group. That is, there's nothing anatomically that connects them all together. They are all connected together based on their origin, which is Laurasia, which is the large northern continent when Pangea started to separate, and that's why they're called Laurasiatheria. And this group is completely connected by DNA analysis. So all the animals that you see that are extant, that have been utilized in this group, are connected by molecular biology and DNA sequence. As far as their phylogeny goes, they all look very different from one another. And they include bats, ungulates, which are hoofed animals, carnivora, which includes polar bears, cats, wolves, moles, shrews, hedgehogs, whales, and dolphins, which are called cetaceans. As far as mammals. And so the reason they're put together, again, even though they look so different, is because of their origin, Laurasia, and because of their molecular basis of the DNA analysis that puts them together phylogenetically. So our last group here is Argentogleires, which is our last supergroup, our superorder here within the class Mammalia. And this group is claimed to fame as it includes us, right? So where it originated, again, in Laurasia, it includes rodents, rabbits, flying lemurs, tree shrews, and the primates. So again, why? There's no shared anatomical features in all of these groups. It's all based, again, on DNA analysis and then on their origin, which again is Laurasia. And so primates are in this group, right? And primates have several anatomical adaptations and DNA connections, obviously. Very large brains, larger brain size to body size than all the rest of the mammals. Prehensile hands and feet, so thumbs and big brains are what makes us dangerous and creative. Stereoscopic vision, eyes in front, right? So we can see. Nails instead of claws in most cases. And long post-birth developmental and parental care. So we got exaggerated, if you will, parental care within this groups. And then really, really complex social behaviors that you can see almost mammal-like social behavior, human-like social behaviors in a lot of the what we call basal groups of primates. The primates that we see today, the major groups evolved somewhere around 60 million, 70 million years ago. The last two slides that I have in this presentation basically go through all of the groups that I covered along the way. That is basically a table out of your text. It's a nice review of all the major groups of chordates that I enjoyed going through with you guys. So, and I ended with a couple images. Being a herpetologist, a reptile guy, this is a eastern spadefoot, and this is a box turtle that, you know, I've seen here in the eastern U.S. So, hope you enjoyed the lecture. Good luck studying, and have a great day.